Well, thank you everybody for coming back on the Innovators Lounge for episode number 2. Our guest today is Jeff Smith. Jeff is a technical solutions executive at Autodesk. For the last 30 years, he has been a veteran industrial designer. For 20 of those years, he was the design director for Reflex Design based out of Pompano Beach, Florida. Over the last 9 years, he's been with Autodesk, teaching the ways of Fusion 360 to students, universities, and professionals alike. He is also an avid educator, being an adjunct professor for multiple universities, including an 8-year stint at the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, which is where I met him. He's my yeah, he's my former advanced design teacher. And thanks, Jeff, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Happy to help out, man. Happy to help out.
So, okay, we're gonna get right into it. Give me a little bit about your background. Where did this spark for where did that creative journey start?
You've heard. Hello, Pat. I guess there's your spark. He's coming in.
Right.
I'd say you've heard my spiel before about drawing and artistic in general. I'm a believer that it's really in everybody, because if you have the dexterity to tie your shoe, you have the dexterity to learn to be a drawer or a creative person. Now, how much you care about it is a whole nother thing, but I'm a believer that it's a little more environment than it is natural gift, let's call it. I think your desire is a big part of it, but I was lucky to grow up and my parents supported my artistic interest as a kid. And it was like, oh, this is something I kind of want to do. This is fun. And they said, okay, fine, we'll help you do this, right? Whereas, maybe other parents might say, no, you're going to be a lawyer, right? And that's happened. That's a common thing. People have said, hey, I got pushed this way. I just happened to be supported that way. And then you put a lot of time and work into perfecting your craft. And there is a thing to the amount of hours put in is the yield out when you're learning a skill set, whatever that skill set might be, if it becomes art or whatever it might be. So I fell into a couple pieces here and there and being influenced by, where we were living and what I saw, and then taking art classes. And then it just kind of rolled its way, towards high school, and then doing more art in high school, and then realizing, oh, I should continue doing this.
What? So, all right. So, was there anyone in your family that was artistic, or was it just, was it something you did yourself, and then people just were supportive around you, or?
From my standpoint, I don't know if artistic's the right point, but my father's father was a problem solver, a tinkerer, and a creator, but he didn't know that's what he didn't know he was a designer, but that's what he was. But that wasn't his training. But from what I sat and did with him, like from a project standpoint, I got to burn myself on a soldering iron with him at, not at probably 7 years old, right? So like doing those things and thinking about those tinkering things, probably him. He was the one that that would have been an influence for me, but not being able to put those pieces together till later, right? Like that problem solving mentality and experimentation mentality, well, he understood it. And exposed me to it, but then you get that training and you're like, oh crap, it's that, right? So anyway, yeah.
Probably. No, I totally feel you on that. I totally feel you. You reflect and you look back like, holy crap, that's where it came. Yeah. For me, it was my grandfather. I was like,
same principle.
He took me to see the Intrepid. Told me to see the Intrepid in New York City. Yeah. I was like, all these cool, fighter craft and everything. That just,
yeah. Oh yeah,
that was it. That was the genesis.
Totally.
So okay, in high school you wanted to, did you want to be an industrial designer, or what was your
I
path?
had no clue. I had no clue what industrial design was. I had no idea. So I knew when I was graduating high school, and I was in northern Ohio, north central Ohio, between Cleveland and Toledo in Sandusky, Ohio, very small town and very small high school. I knew that I wanted to do something within art. So when I went and looked at colleges, I went to CCS in Detroit, which in 1989 was a different city than it is, years ago and now. I went to Columbus College of Art and Design. I went to DAP in Cincinnati, and I went to Cleveland Institute of Art. And I'm originally from Buffalo, and our neighbors across the street in Buffalo, they're originally from Rochester. So they suggested to my parents, "Oh, go look at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York." I went there, looked at that, and said, "Hey, this looks like an interesting school." I'm like, "All right." Again, still don't know anything about industrial design. I went in as an art major. I thought I was going to do graphic design. And I guess I got lucky because all the art majors followed the same core foundation class first year, as most schools do. I mean, that's a common thing. But my freshman year drawing teacher, which I learned a lot from, he was trying to steer me to go towards medical illustration. So I went and learned about that. And I went to that department, learned that you shared a cadaver with a medical student from the University of Rochester. I looked at some of the things you did, and I was like, wow, this is very interesting. This fits my drawing style. I could see why my teacher, Bob, was telling me to go do this. I'm like, okay, I understand. I get why you're telling me to do this. And you probably don't know this, John, but you know John Payne.
Yes.
John Payne was in my freshman drawing class. He was already industrial design. He knew what he was doing. So I walked over with him and toured the industrial design department. And my department chair, Toby Thompson, gave a 20-minute presentation on what industrial design was. Didn't talk about his work, didn't talk about any student work, just gave us the spiel on what this was. And I said, "Sold. I'm with you. Let's go." Right. That is the ticket. That's where I'm going. And that's where I went. I did my second year, I did do a minor in illustration as well, because it was only 4 extra hours. So you got an extra associate's degree for doing 4 hours more of work per quarter. And you're like, okay, cool. So I did that as well. But I went that way at that time.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. For me, it was I was going to do automotive design, and I went out to San Francisco, and I mean, I went to art center, and they destroyed me. They took my portfolio. You suck. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I went to Academy of Art in San Francisco, and then I had it with the car designers like, dude, you're great, but you're not a car designer. You're an industrial designer. I'm like, what the hell is that?
Yeah,
it's funny how it works.
So it's pretty cool that, and we'll go back on your track in 1 second, because yours is interesting. But I did get to visit both those schools for Autodesk and work with them as well, which was cool. Anyway, go ahead.
Awesome. No. It's just I think it's interesting how sometimes life can shift you in different directions, and
100%.
it's for the best. So 100%. Toby Thompson, am I saying Toby Thompson? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember you talking about him a lot. Was he an influence on you, like a big one?
Totally. Toby, he did a lot of different things and emphasized what it is to be an industrial designer, and took it on every level, like attention to detail and attention to, like, if you're an industrial designer, you should be able to do graphic design because it's 2D. Right. And he was passionate about that because, it's a interesting tangential field, and he was passionate about that. But everything down to like wearing the right clothes, showing, the marketing people in the room or the salespeople in the room that you understand how things go together, which gives you more credibility in the bigger picture of the business world, and every little bit and piece of pulling everything together. But I don't know. I can't remember when you were at the Art Institute. You might have been after, but I was teaching there for a couple of years, maybe 4 in that level, and I saw in an IDSA publication that Toby had retired to Florida, and I sent him a letter, right, in this world, and I said, hey, you're here, you're 2 hours away, I'm teaching as adjunct part-time doing this. Would you come talk to my students? They need your spark, right? I'm doing a good job, but you do better, right? So he writes me back, sends me a copy of the resume that I did 14 years prior to that, maybe 15 years prior, in his class. Says, I got you, man, and I'll come help. So he came over for a day and gave that 2-hour talk on why, how, power, skill, and design. And if you talk to some of the students who saw that, like, they understand it even more now. Like, anyway, but it was just, that's why the guy, I owe him, right? So yeah.
No, it's funny how that works. I'm kind of like that with you. It's awesome like that.
Always giving back. That's all.
Yeah, right.
Try to help.
Yeah, man. I graduated in 2009. Here we are. I'm on my podcast. It's awesome.
I'm happy to help.
So college. All right. So you fell in love with industrial design. You went to college, graduated. What was did you get a job right out of school? How did that work?
I got real lucky. I graduated in '93, and that was a dip in the economy at that point in time as well. And I participated in the Student Merit Awards at my program. My friend Mark won. I took first runner up. But one of the judges was an alumni, and he literally had been asked to start a company the month prior, and he started Reflex Design based on a group of OEM fitness equipment manufacturers to be the design company for their larger group. And he hired me right out of school. So I started immediately as number 2 of 2. And it was a very interesting experience working with Jim, and I learned a lot. And since he was alumni, maybe 8-9 years ahead of me, it was a good experience. About 3 years in, maybe 2.5, he said, I'm going to Kodak. And the owner of the OEM manufacturing group said, would you take over? And I was like, yeah, I got 2.5 years of experience. I can do this. Right? No problem. We got this. So I started hiring people, and we grew, and, got the company got bigger, and, we then relocated to South Florida from Rochester to be closer to a US-based sales organization for the larger OEM group. So we were a small 3-people group in Rochester. They had like 35 down here, and it was like, well, you need to consolidate down with them, so we're going to not have multiple offices. Okay, cool, no problem. Did that, started growing, and from there we made it pretty far into a medium 7 to 10 person, depending on what was happening, design office that we branched out from the whole sibling organization we got to about 50-50, where we were 50% internal sibling group and about 50% external, different companies here and there, and it was a good experience.
So okay, that's very. So Greenmaster did workout equipment, correct? For Reebok,
correct. Greenmaster was the parent organization.
and they did like
you know that because you did work with them.
Yeah.
But nobody else does.
I gotta explain it. That's very interesting. Like the whole dynamic of a Taiwanese company, building an American-based design agency.
And kudos to them. Like,
right.
In 1993, saying, we're a Taiwanese OEM manufacturer. We're going to start our own US-based design firm. Kudos to them. Like, that was smart, right? I mean, super smart and super, aware of what the market was going and what they needed to do to differentiate themselves from their peers of OEM manufacturers. So kudos. That was a smart idea.
Did they have like, all right, so they had the competitors that, I mean, I'm assuming they went either Taiwanese or they went to China. Or,
oh yeah.
But was there a benefit of having an American, like in your eyes, what you saw, the product, the design that was coming out from Reflex compared to the competitors?
Well, I would say the initial benefit was they immediately became a 24-hour workforce for product design and development. So in one day, their products were being worked on over 24 hours, right? So whatever engineering work they were doing, you then had US based in the opposite time zone continuing development. So that was the other interesting part that most people gloss over is instead of having your one-day shift in Taiwan, you just doubled the process and you kept things moving overnight. For the size of their company, that was a really good idea.
That's very interesting. That is very
starting point, efficiency. Secondary point is you now have people coming to the table with different perspectives, both from a consumer standpoint, from a location standpoint, from a design standpoint, to counter their world. Because I mean, when you start to go to different places and you learn about different cultures, everyone is taught differently, and you bring different perspectives, and different perspectives are good for a final result.
Sure. No, that's really interesting. No, I never even thought about that. That's 100% right. That
time zone.
Hours, like, that's amazing. No, it makes total sense. Yeah. Like they design, engineer, and then we have to do design. We'll go to sleep. They're gonna work.
And that's next morning, the system starts again, and it goes going back and forth. And that was, it's a simple logistical thing that, to your point, you might not think of right away. And you're like, for their company size to reach that level of workforce was a really good idea. And especially
how big was Greenmaster?
From a dollar standpoint or from a people standpoint, they had 4 factories. So I'd say somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 range, ballpark, with all their sales offices, with all their manufacturing. I'd say in that ballpark.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So I know you guys did a lot of, you did the Greenmaster work, but you did a lot of stuff with like, not it's Noel brands now, Jordan. And were they okay with that? Like, did they push you for that, or was it kind of on you to go hunt for that?
No, that was me. I pushed for that. I pushed to expand because it was okay. If you look at the time I spent there, like I didn't go anywhere else, right? Most designers tend to jump. Like, I'm going to go work here. I'm going to go work here. And why do they leave? Because you get bored with the product, you get bored with the process, and there's no diversity of what you're working on. There's no room. There's no, So I fell into the right point where I had all this fitness stuff, and then combined with, travel, going to Taiwan and China, working, learning, doing things like that, awesome, stimulating, keeping your mind going. And where you'd normally come to a point where you'd be like, I can't take this type of product anymore. I grew that outside business. So if you were working on a treadmill and then you shifted and started working on a food processor or a vacuum sealer or Innovator product or a glucose meter, your scale and everything changed and your thought process changed. So then when you went back and did an exercise bike, you were fresher. Like, so,
Exactly. You
so
refreshed.
that's what motivated me. And I tried to cycle these things through the different designers' workloads. So you didn't just get stuck doing one thing, because it would get old. Right?
Sure.
So
No, I think you're 100%.
yeah.
You know, my career is kind of like that too. I work for organizations. You get, and it's not like you're not a good employee. You just, you burned out a little bit. It's like, okay, I've designed
Yes,
a freaking
100%.
chair. How many times am I going to design a chair? It's like you want to get some, nuance. You know. So the one thing that, and so I personally have interned and I've worked for Reflex. And the one thing I've always admired is the caliber of talent that came out of that organization. From going from you and John down to Anderson and DJ and Josh.
Yeah.
Was that something that was there a bar that you always put out, like, we gotta be the best, and how did that come together?
Yeah. I always wanted to have a certain caliber level of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And I wanted to offer everybody that worked there, whether it was a full-time employee or an intern or a part-time employee, whatever it might be, I wanted to offer experience and a sense of ownership of what you were doing. Because I mean, from a competitive standpoint, we were all underpaid, including me, right? The whole company we didn't have the financial resources that a larger design firm or internal company had, right? So everything that attracted someone to work there had to be very rewarding, right? To have a sense of ownership, to have a sense of responsibility, and a crazy development in what you're doing. That was my main goal, was to, because I knew I couldn't compete from a sheer dollar to dollar standpoint. Like, we just didn't have the money to throw around in that regard, right? So we had to give people another level that was like, okay, this is great. That's why I was there, right? I knew I was, underpaid for what I was doing, but it was a sense of, how much can we do? How much can I learn? And having a sense of, I don't want to say self-governance, but like, okay, here's what you got to do. You're in charge of that, right? Like, just, I'm not going to just sit there and watch you do it, right? You own this, right? Just like I'm owning what I'm looking at, right? So it was a sense of, personal responsibility that, and respect. I think that's what
it's very empowering. Yeah, no, it's very empowering, because I think a lot of organizations, and I've worked for them, that they micromanage you to death, and it's kind of, I think they're just good. It's done with a good heart. They want things to be done in a good way, but I think it's counterintuitive. If you give people 100%. Empower people, they're going to do amazing things, 100%. Especially 100%. Creatives. No one had a gun to our head when we chose this career. We want to do this, and this is what we love to do. So we give us something to sink our teeth into. We're going to go after it and do great things at it. Very interesting. So when did you start your family? Like your wife and your kids? I remember Andy when he was a little guy, man.
Yeah. I got married in 2000, and probably, in normal man fashion, you think everything should wait to get married, wait to have kids, wait to buy a house. You're wrong, right? It's just, I could have started earlier on everything. All it does is make you older later, right? That's when you're dealing with all this stuff, right? But yeah, so 2000 I got married, in 2004 started, down that road, and having that experience of family based, just makes you think a little bit differently. But yeah.
I just remember. No, I remember your wife. She was so involved, and it was like a joint thing. It wasn't separated. And when you're saying you were underpaid, it seems like there was like a team effort. Like, you guys understood the mission, what you're trying to do. I think that's empowering. When a family unit works together.
Yeah, and that was due to a couple experiments. Like, we tried to hire a couple salespeople and management people, and they were fine. They did okay, but it just didn't seem to work out right. And I mean, literally, it was to me, it was a decision like, we're already paying for her healthcare, right? If we hire her to do this, she has a marketing degree and she can do this side of it, and she'd done outside sales before. We're saving on we're saving on healthcare because we're paying for it already. So that was the main catalyst. And obviously she had the experience, so it was fine, and could care about it as well. So that was the point, right? It was a double-edged sword of caring about it, experience, and we're getting a little bit of savings on healthcare.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I always admired about you and rubbed off on me was your dedication to education, like your willingness to, you were an adjunct faculty member at the Art Institute. So you that means you work professionally, and you came in after the after hours and taught, but you continued with that. Where did that come from? Where did that spark come from? That willingness to teach?
It comes from physical instruction is actually where it comes from. So when I was in college, I lifeguarded and I taught swimming. So when you learn how to teach complex physical movement or dynamic physical movement, and you can break that down to simple structures, you learn. I mean, I learned that was something I could do. So I'm like, all right, cool. And then when I graduated college, I also worked part-time as a ski instructor. So I learned about more dynamic movement and learning progression and how to teach biomechanical things. Like, they're very complex, and you're like, okay. So from that standpoint, that's what showed me about education. I'd always been involved in wanting to do more in the design world. And I got to consult for the department chair at the Art Institute. I sponsored a class, and then they asked me, at that time we were running SolidWorks, and they asked me to consult on what CAD platform to go towards at that time in the late 90s. And at that point in time, the department chair said, hey, would you teach that class for me then? Would you teach SolidWorks? So that's how I started to get involved there. Pieces fell into place, and I, said, I could teach this class, or I could teach this class. And then we started rotating classes. So I had two a quarter, and like, okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's super rewarding. And it actually, you'd be surprised. I mean, most people watching might not have taught before, but when you've taught something, you realize how much it teaches you. It's not just the students that's benefiting. It also teaches you how to do things better, whether it's a skill, whether it's mental organization, whether it's not reading off a note card, right? So, there's all kinds of things that it teaches you as well. So it's a win-win.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. And to, there was also a motivational standpoint, right? At that time, the art institutes didn't have the largest reputation, let's say.
Right.
Right. And, sometimes professional organizations maybe miss that, or they don't see things that don't have big reputations. So I was also motivated by the work I saw, the dedication I saw to help establish and, grow the reputation, right? To say, these are what these students are putting out. Look what they're doing, right? So I was motivated by that as well, to help the students, but also help the school bolster its reputation.
So you were talking about education. The reason I brought that up was because you instilled a internship program with the Art Institute for Lauderdale, which I think was really, really powerful. What were your parameters for that? Like, what were some of the things you wanted to do? What were your goals to bring students in and help and teach them?
Sure. So there's a two pieces to the internship program that we established. So one, it was a class requirement for the students. So they had to do an internship. So you needed to check that box, otherwise you couldn't graduate, right? So being South Florida, there's not as many, design centric places here. There's some, and there's plenty of internships available, but I wanted to add another one. And I wanted to extend the teaching and learning system. So the group that I offered an internship to every quarter, because we established it to try and have it every quarter. Sometimes there were 2 students, sometimes there was 1, and it was a one a day or maybe 2 half days. Like you didn't work full time, but you did, let's say you did 1 day a week, right? Because it was a class requirement. So what I wanted the students to get out of that was a portfolio piece. That was my goal, because it was a class, so they weren't paid. But my goal was to let them take a project with them, and they wouldn't work on billable work, right? They'd do a shadow project that had already been done, right? It was already finished and out the door. So they'd then work on first, usually study, like, hey, study this file, understand how this CAD file was built and the process we went through, learn, like really study it, fine tooth comb, right? So you could understand that. And then 2, go through the whole design process through the quarter, and you could take the whole thing with you then. And you had an example, because when I reviewed portfolios, you'd see people that say I had an internship, but they couldn't show anything because they couldn't show anything.
Right.
So my goal was to say, yeah, you take that with you, you show that, right? And in addition, as we move forward, I could give designers at Reflex the ability to then teach, train, and lead interns, right? So the intern's learning, the designer's learning to manage other people's time and work, which is a win-win for everybody, right? So that was the main goal, was to elevate and help all participants, right? Like how do you get the student to get them to get the next job, right? That's, by being able to showcase, I did this at a company, not in a school environment, is a fairly weighty thing,
Sure.
getting out of school. It's like, yeah, it's not quite real world experience, but it's also not schoolwork. Like it's another level of self-motivation.
Sure. No, that's yeah, that was
the intent.
Yeah, no, that was very important, I think, because you're right. A lot of times you go intern in these places that you work on things you can't showcase at all.
Mm-hmm.
You're forbidden to show it in NDAs and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or the project is just it's not done yet, and still. But yeah, that's great. That's the whole point of the whole thing, is the education, and
Correct.
it was a really robust, from your teaching at the school into the internship program. There was that whole narrative, what you did with Reflex. I think it was great.
And it meant the goal was to have it flow together, right? Because it was all about elevating kind of everyone, because it helped me, it helped the company, it helped the student, it helped the school, right? So it was a team effort to help everyone get a little bigger and a little stronger at what they were doing and what their reputation was. It was for all involved.
So I think that's great. The one thing I wanted to ask you is, I looked at other schools since I've been working in the industry for years now. I've looked at other schools, and there's a lot of philosophy in design. And the one thing I think the Art Institute was really good at, especially that period with Brent and you and Patricia, you guys had a very practical, grounded approach to design, very real world, and we had a lot of tangible skills. We left that school, I was able. Yeah, I might not have had that experience, professional big time experience, but I had, the sketching skills, the 3D modeling skills. I had things that I was marketable. It wasn't just pontification. It was, execution. I was able to do that. When you look today, do you think other schools are kind of waking up to that, or is it, there's kind of a divide, or what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so at that time in 2000 to 2008, that was one of my main goals, was practical realism, because that's how I was trained. And that's my background as far as when my, college and then work life was, things are real, right? This is what it is, and this is how you got to do it. So my education was very skill based. And at that time, having seen other schools and been to other schools at that time, to your point, there was some philosophy, there was some other points, and all are good, but my experience showed me that the tactile, skill-based overlay over the design process and mentality and design thinking was a broader approach to make a wider range of people successful, right? Like, you could go out and do this or do that or do that or do that. I'm like, oh, you cover more bases, there's a greater chance you get hired, right?
Sure.
Right. If you say I'm, this only or this specialist, you limit, maybe you can only get these number of jobs. But if you could do all those things, you then could do more things.
Right.
That was
No,
my
and I remember that because when I graduated, it was 08, 09 recession. It was a bit tough. And I remember just going back on those skill sets allowed me to thrive and have some success, even with the desolate job market, and you still need people to model in 3D. You still need people to sketch, and, you might not be getting into the higher end design thinking yet, but the fact that you can execute things, I think is very important. I try to instill that myself, like on my LinkedIn page. When we talk about get to the point, practical realism, it's great to think and talk about design, and it's fine, but sometimes you got to be able to execute. Yep. So awesome. So okay, so you were at Reflex. What was your transition out of Reflex? How did that? What happened there? Was it wanting to leave? Was it what happened?
Well, everybody has problems and hiccups in their careers, and sometimes things happen, and sometimes businesses turn, and sometimes things don't always end up the way you thought they were going to end up. So I hit a giant speed bump in that time, and it's just economy, and people didn't want to pay, and losing long time customers because of financial reasons really squoze us a lot. And I thought that I had neglected my network, but I would have to say that when I left the Art Institute, set me up for when I hit a speed bump at Reflex, because the Art Institute switched their game plan around 08, and they basically got rid of all their adjunct faculty and said only full-time. And I'm like, I can't. I got to do this, right? This is because I will enjoy this. I can't, so anyway, so we parted ways, let's say. But I was still involved in education and involved in IDSA, and I went to schools and I hosted workshops, right? Like I went to Virginia Tech, I went to Georgia Tech, I went to RIT, and I, did presentations and hosted workshops on drawing or CAD or whatever. And because I did that, it helped foster my network. So then, in 2014, when I kind of things got wonky and hit the speed bump at Reflex, I was able to reach out, to my network, and, some of the connections that I had built from additional students, like make connections down the road. And next thing a guy that I knew at Autodesk, I reached out to him, and, he said, oh man, I'm switching positions. You'd be awesome, backfilling me, So that was the education team at Autodesk. And, he's like, oh, you you've been in design for so long, you've been a power user in competitive software, and you're involved in education. Like, oh man, you'd be like perfect on the Autodesk education team. I'll put you in as my backfill. I'm moving over here. And I said, okay. And that was a very interesting process to go through, interviewing without a portfolio, because they didn't care. And I'm like, I'm not hiring you to design anything. Like, oh, this is weird. But because of those three aspects, I got offered the job at Autodesk to be on their education team, which was basically helping to promote, partner, and accelerate the adoption of Fusion 360 in industrial design, mechanical engineering, and biomechanical engineering at colleges in the US. But that's awesome, you design, but we don't want you to do that.
Right.
I want you to talk about that, but I don't want you to do that. That's a strange hurdle to come in front of when you've been a designer for a long period of time and what you identify as. But in retrospect, you're like, okay, this is good. This is a good choice to go.
So okay, there's a lot to unpack there, because there's a lot of really interesting experiences and perspectives. Part of having a hiccup in your career. First of all, thank you for being honest about that.
Always be ready. Be ready, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Right. No, I was laid off at Office Depot. I remember that, having to pivot. And I think it's relevant now, as for the last 12 months, so many big organizations have laid off so many talented people. This is relevant for everybody, and having to adjust and going from that. So when you left, or when you parted ways from Reflex and then Autodesk came about, from a family's perspective, I'm really interesting, how you and your wife worked together and finding a direction. Like, did you guys team up and like, we're going to figure this out? Like, I think it's a stressor. And I think,
it's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Like, there was no planning. There was no anything. This was just, oh crap. Right. And it was me reaching out to my network and finding things, because we had a family, we had 2 kids, and it was basically divide and conquer at that point in time. You deal with this, I'm dealing with that, right? Like, we gotta make, I'm gonna make this happen now, right? This is bad. So when Autodesk offered me the job, there was no maybe yes, let's go, right? There was no choice. It was a bit of a pill to swallow, not being a designer anymore. That's you identify that way, but in retrospect, it's been a very, very good experience learning how powerful design mentality is, to be able to strategically plan, to be able to look at things at 30,000 feet and at 10 feet, where other professions don't have to do that. And our ability to pivot and look at things from different vantage points and think about things differently, and not be soft about certain things, and make quick decisions and fail quick and go forward, it helps a lot, because basically my job was, I went from design to sales, is really what it was. And even though I wasn't selling, I was giving away our software, because it's free to all education. So I was just saying, hey, how can I help you use this? Right? I mean, but in a way, it is sales. You're like, hey, I need, we need to help you to use this. And how do you use this? So very different, but the design mentality and the design process of getting out there and being able to, granted, being an industrial designer and talking to a mechanical engineering program is one thing, right? Okay, because we speak slightly different languages, but I got the idea. But when you go to industrial design program, you speak the same language. Like we're in the same program here. And I can remember specifically, I would say to any connection I would make at a design office, I'll come do a sketching workshop for you guys. And my manager at that time is like, why are you doing that? That's got nothing to do with Fusion, right? And I'm like, but I'm building a trusted advisor standpoint and relationship. If I come here and I do this and you benefit from it, well, maybe next time we'll do a Fusion workshop and you'll benefit from that. So it's a sometimes it's not the most direct route, but sometimes you got to go around a little bit.
It's a bit of the well, it's also a bit of the long game. You know, you have this vision that you want to help, you want to onboard them with the software. And like you said, the trusted advisor, giving people essentially free information.
Free help.
Right. And then they can grow with that. And they're like, oh, I know Jeff's awesome with that. Oh, he's gonna teach us Fusion. Hell yeah, let's open our
let's listen to that.
Yeah.
I mean, all I'm asking you to do is listen. You know, so
that's great. No, I really appreciate all that because, you know, the last interview we had, Andreas had the similar situation where he was at Concepto and he left and went to Pininfarina and was going from design to business management, and so it's a huge learning experience. And it's humbling, you know what I mean? Because you flex so hard when you're at, a company for 10, 20 years. This is what I'm awesome at, and then you're a fish out of water.
Yep.
And now you're doing something completely new. Yeah, it might be relevant in certain areas, but at the end of the day, you are not a designer anymore. You're sales, essentially.
And to basically go to cold calling. Right?
Sure.
Cold calling,
right.
I mean, yes, very targeted, for your customer and the people you're working with, but you have to at least get someone to believe you to say, yeah, I'll listen to you if you come up, I'll talk with you for an hour. And realistically, that personal connection and that one-on-one is why people believe you. And, I had many people say, I'll give this a try because you're here. You show up. I have confidence that if I have a problem, you'll show up and you'll help me. Like, okay, let's try it. So sometimes it's that personal honor and connection to say, yeah, I'm here. I'm your guy. You want to try this? Fine, I'll help you. If there's a problem, I'll be here. Right? I mean, that's kind of the general attitude.
I think also for younger kids, because I've been doing a lot of work recently with high school students, and it's that integrity when they see an authority figure come in and is so dedicated and willing and is showing up, like you just said, there's that inherent trust. It's like, all right, I'm leaning on this guy. I'm going to lean into this because I feel like this guy's going to help me out, and that's powerful. And I think that's something that a lot of people should learn. Like just having integrity, showing up, and being consistent goes a long freaking way.
I'm a believer in regurgitating. So if I tell you something, right, and this is what I'm going to do, then I do that, then I come back to you and say, how can I help more? But then when someone tells me something, I like to regurgitate back to them to make sure I got it. Right? Like I'm telling you exactly what you just told me to make sure there's nothing lost in translation.
Sure.
Like I'm a believer in that.
That's great. So, okay, I want to kind of ask you your experience going from SolidWorks. All right, so before I get into that, the whole thing about, I'm a big believer of knowledge acquisition and learning, going from like a big program like SolidWorks. You've been a power user of SolidWorks, and then going to Fusion. That experience, I mean, thankfully the two programs are very similar to one another in many, many ways, but it's a very interesting perspective. I think a lot of people are going to make that bridge at some point, wanting to go, Fusion is so cheap and it's efficient and powerful. What was that like for you, kind of like onboarding yourself to a new program?
Okay, so, when I went to Autodesk, I had been using SolidWorks for over 17 years. And I had taught it at the Art Institute for 8 years. So I would consider myself a power user in the design and modeling side of SolidWorks. And when I started at Autodesk, I had never used Fusion 360. That was late 2014. And when I got hired, I distinctly remember I went to San Francisco and I went to our headquarters there in downtown San Francisco, and I went through a training program, and then I had like a half day, and I started poking at Fusion. And to be blunt, I was a little bit scared and said, oh my goodness, what have I done? How am I going to get people to adopt this versus what I was coming from? Because I know that most design schools were teaching that. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is not what I expected. The workflow was not that great. The power wasn't that great. It really wasn't, from a user standpoint, I was just like, everything was opposite and foreign. And I was just like, what am I doing? But, and here's the big but. As soon as I was hired, I had about 5 program managers from the Fusion 360 team reach out to me, literally within 2 weeks. And they said, I want you to document your learning process coming from a power user standpoint with SolidWorks. And I want you to come back to me. And I want you to debrief me on your learning process. I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. If you're the guys in charge of making this tool and you want to absorb my competitive knowledge as I learn your tool, that's really good. That's a good idea. Like, you guys are on the ball. Now, compared to the feeling I got when I opened the program, that was very much reassuring. So I took my time, and I took 3 months. And as I was getting used to the job and spending a couple hours every day modeling, I documented and I made notes, and I literally wrote them out. And I had like 55 to 65 problems where I was just like, no, 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 bad, 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 no, no, no. And it went on. And I sat on it for another month, and I kept going. And I realized that maybe 85% of them were me not learning, right, and figuring it out. But there was a solid 10 where I was like, these are deal breakers. Like, these are problems, right? We got to do something about this. And I went back to the various program managers, and I had a really awesome experience where it gave me an impression of this new company that I wasn't expecting. And I'd say out of those 10 things, 6 of them were already on their development list. And they said, oh, this one will be out in 3 months. That one will be out in 6 months. We'll fix that in 8 months. And about 4 of them, they were like, that's a good idea. We're adding that in now. And I was like, okay. So what you're telling me is you're on the ball, but you're also willing to listen and add more to the ball. So I was like, okay. And so I went through the process. It kept changing. It got better. I could see the things that literally I said show up. And I was like,
wow,
right, this is great. This is awesome. And over the course of about 3 years, you could see all those 10 things come together, plus other things. But, those are the ones I noted because I cared about them more than anything. And you saw those come together, and you're like, oh. And then one day, about a year in, I was starting to understand more and get the workflow. And I had an epiphany moment where I was like, oh, that 20 minutes would have taken me a day in SolidWorks.
Wow.
It's like, oh, okay, I'm in. I'm done. Okay, good to go. Good to go. We're going with you now, right? Granted, there's positive negatives in every piece of software, but that epiphany moment where I was like, okay, I'm with you now. And then the fact that it constantly improves, and they constantly listen, and they constantly do things. So I to give another example about the development process, I worked for almost 4 years on the education team. And then, as you alluded to, I switched to about 3 years on customer success. So customers that have bought Fusion, I went and helped them to implement more, to use more, to experiment more. And during my first year there, I was doing a demo, and Fusion crashed like 3 times. I was trying to do the same thing with the customer. And I'm just like, okay, so great. That's awesome. Thank you for crashing 3 times in front of the customer. But literally 8 minutes later, I'm still presenting, and I get a pop-up in my computer with one of the program managers who saw the crash report asking me for the file. And the customer saw that.
Damn.
And they're like,
wow.
Oh, that's pretty quick, right? Literally, they saw the crash, and they saw them come to me asking for the file, right? And I said, always say yes to the crash report. Always tell them, because they may come to you right away and say, send me that file. I want to learn what happened. So, I mean, that stuff like that, you're just like, wow. It's like super impressive, like the amount of smart people working on this stuff, let alone the fact that, I gave stuff away. I just went to colleges and gave it away. And sometimes we gave them money, but we're giving software away. It's all education. It was a really interesting experience, and seeing all those schools and watching Fusion improve. And, I wish I would have bought a personal license then, because I would have, got it $135 a year, because that's locked it in. But I didn't. But it's still a good price now. But then it was a really good price. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, that brings me to my next point, and it's kind of conversation about where, given that Solaris is, it's kind of unattainable for a lot of people, and I think Fusion is so. The price point, even at the price point of buying a full CD, it's so affordable, and
you can make it happen.
Right, the customer service is so good. I talked to my nephew, and he's in college now, but when he was in high school, a couple of years ago, it was the same thing. It's like, these programs are so effective. You can get a 3D printer now for a couple $100.
Yep.
Some educate, going online into YouTube and learning a little bit. You're powerful. You're going to learn a lot just on your own. So are you excited to see where the future's going for that?
100%. And to your point, if you're the name Fusion is not, it's not an accident, because it's literally pulling together all these different tool sets that into one native environment. I'm sure, the modeling side, cool. I can do surface models, I can do solid models, I can do T-spline models, and they all work together, and I can do an assembly and all that stuff, right? That's cool. But I've become a huge proponent of designers learning the simulation tools in Fusion. And it's like, wait a second, I can understand and learn how to run a static stress test and know if this piece is job before I go to engineering and before I collaborate with engineering. That is insanity, right? That I can figure that out, right? And understand. It's nuts.
100%. I'm learning that. I'm doing FEA analysis. Holy crap! This is so empowering.
This is nuts. And Ray Alonso, I mean, Ray has come towards Fusion too. And the reason I bring up Ray is he's now implementing CNC with Fusion. Never had done CNC before. And he's optimizing and saving the company money doing CNC. Like, I know people, that worked on teams with me who are like expert machinists, and it's unbelievable. But the fact that someone new to it can learn that skill set and save money, make things more profitable. I mean, I'll go so far as to say generative design. I'm also a huge proponent in that. Is just like, man, this is some powerful stuff that it's at my fingertips. And even if I use it to think about something differently, it's crazy.
Right. No, 100. I agree with that 100%. To your point with Ray and his experiences and working, it's all about workflow for me. In my organization too. It's communicating with somebody. One of the most powerful things I've always seen with it is the electronics end of it, the PCB, being able to build PCBs, actually build it, like, because a lot of times, they're building things and the Gerber files and all that, but it's tough to get an actual CAD file you can do something with in the 3D model. They're building it, and it's like you can occupy it and you can actually create a board, and it's unbelievable. And you can put the tracers in there and all that. It's incredible, and I think that the program is so empowering for the workflow, and it's for $500. It's hard to beat.
It's hard to beat. And you want to know an insider fun South Florida tie-in? So you mentioned the PCB design, right? That was a product called Eagle that got integrated into Fusion. Eagle was based in Pembroke Pines.
Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
We technically had an Autodesk office in Pembroke Pines for a period of time. And those guys are still down here in South Florida that run that side of the business. But it's pretty funny that it's based here. So it's pretty cool. But that's again, I can design PCB in Fusion. Like, wait a second. Yeah.
No, and it's robust. That's the other thing too. It's not just loosely. There's a lot of CAD out there, a lot of free programs or cheap programs that are okay, but Fusion is very powerful and
very powerful. And I was, when I first started, I was weirded out by the whole cloud aspect of it, but I don't think I could go back. Like, when I first started, I was used to, this is my file set and I got to manage this. And now I'm like, I'll just send you a link, or I'll invite you to the project, or I'll invite you to my team. It's like, I don't want to deal with sending. It's like, or my network, or like this, everything's, I don't have to worry about it. It's all backed up. I can access it anywhere I log in, and it's secure. I'm like, okay, this is cool. So
awesome.
I'm sold now.
So your experience is teaching all these things. Where have you taught? I mean, you've taught here in America. Have you taught abroad?
So I have done workshops at different places in different parts of the world. I taught at the RST the longest, but I also did 1 year at RIT as adjunct faculty, and I did 1 year at Iowa State as adjunct faculty teaching remotely. I've taught workshops at a couple schools in Europe, and I was able to do tour a couple schools in Japan when I was on the education team, and work with our Japan team and do some workshops and some integrations with them at a couple schools in Tokyo and Osaka.
What's that experience? What was that experience like?
Japan?
Teaching Japanese, the Japanese, people that saw the program and everything. So
if you spend time going to Taiwan and going to China or Japan or anywhere that regards, they have a really good, in general, their cultures tend to treat a foreigner or someone that's different fairly, respectfully. And they have a real good, they want to show you the best side of their culture and the best influence. And it was always rewarding visiting that part of the world in that regard. And the Japanese are really, really good at that. And they're really good at customer experience. So when you go there and you're an educator or an expert from somewhere else, their attention to you and their courtesy to you and listening to what you have to say are really good. So it was a great experience going there to the different schools, and a real nice collaborative team effort, because I worked with my counterparts in Japan who went to colleges there, and we co-collaborated going to their schools, and they could leverage me as, hey, I'm bringing this guy, he's coming all the way here to talk to us. And, so it was a real good experience.
That's awesome. No,
Anybody should go to Japan if you get the opportunity.
I always want to go to Japan.
Japan's awesome.
I'm an old school Godzilla guy, so I got to get out there and see Toho Studios.
The first time I went to Japan was like 95 or 97, and going in now is much easier.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Much easier. Yeah.
That's awesome. Easier. That's awesome. So, okay. We're almost done. I have a couple questions. What's your thoughts on AI generally? Like,
okay, I am both scared and excited about AI. People think that generative design inside of Fusion is AI, but it's almost not. It's really just crunching numbers on a large scale. It's not artificial intelligence. It's mass computing crunching numbers. So it's not necessarily artificial intelligence. It's you're framing a question and you're having a lot of computers crunch numbers to figure out that question. AI, on the other hand, I've been playing with Viscom for the past 3 months or 4 months, and 2 months ago, I would have told you I'm not that concerned, because I fed in line work and it failed. It couldn't deal with it. It was just like, this is terrible. Like, could not handle it. About 2 weeks ago, I conducted the same experiment and it did a lot better with it. Hence my fear and excitement over what AI is doing. I don't know if it's going to be the downfall of our society or if it's going to be exceptionally powerful tool to leverage. I don't know. I don't know what it is. You could ask me and I could say it could be either.
Right. No, I agree.
Could be either.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. It's super interesting, but I mean, spent a lot of time learning things and doing things, and you feed some line work into it and it does a rendering. You're like, well, why would I do why would I learn
right.
all
right
do that? And Adobe's doing all kinds of things too, so it's not just that's one group.
No, there's things in Photoshop that are pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that's Viscom's definitely got. I talked to the CEO of Viscom about 2 years ago, and it was like baby stuff, and then you're right. Like I uploaded a lot of stuff too. It was just it was interesting, but it was fluff to me, and most of it was just.
I do have a glimmer of hope, and my glimmer of hope is that there's something about the risk and the risk of a person, and I think that's why people watch sports and watch sports live, because the failure is part of it, but so is the success. And if you're a person doing a skill set, there's an interest in failure or success. And I have a glimmer of hope that element transcends this way. But I don't know if that'll make it. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm obviously I use Midjourney a lot. I think Midjourney is very interesting for creating mood boards and like kind of inspirational things. I won't necessarily dive into it as far as design goes. I'm not that impressed with it. I think it's a lot of pretty pictures, but
some of the stuff I've got out of Viscom recently and the prompts I've given it and the fact that I fed it CAD files as well. I'm like, oh boy.
Well, yeah, but that's my point with that is I think Viscom is good because it's crap in and crap out. If you put good stuff in, you're gonna get good stuff out. So I've seen people put really rough sketches, and there's obviously the end result beautiful, but there's a disconnect, right?
100%, 100%. But what I've done on most of my tests is I give it something that I want, and I slowly reduce my influence of what I gave it, and I do a step process to see what it gives me, combined with the word prompts I give it. You know, and it's very interesting. I'm the way I look at it is the amount it changed in the last 2 months. At what point in time is it giving me actual 3D surface data back?
Sure.
It's not happening today.
No.
But is that 2 years away? Is that 18 months away? Is that 12 months away? When is this happening? It's going to happen.
Yeah.
When and who is going to do this?
Sure. No, absolutely. I'm always curious too, because I do a lot of stuff with manufacturing, and there's a lot of things with like ISO and like control and UL and all that. Like there's things you have to keep in mind. I'm wondering how that's going to handle it. And then you look at these programs and how the way people have adopted them. Like those two, I think it's 1 or 2 lawyers up in New York that used ChatGPT to write up some of their precedent for a law case, and they ended up being completely wrong. It's complete gibberish. Is it going to be something like that? Is that going to hurt somebody? Like, is the product going to fail? Is a tool you're going to make going to be not working right?
But you could say the same thing about a designer modeling something that doesn't know anything about manufacturing, but it took them 2 weeks to model it. If AI generates it in 3 minutes, you save 2 weeks that you could work on making it manufacturable.
Right.
So it's all about context.
Sure.
And time is money.
That's true. That's very true. Well, I guess we'll leave it off from there. And I really appreciate it, Jeff. I learned a lot. I think there's a lot of really interesting content. I really appreciate your, openness about some of the situations that transpired over your career. I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot. And, one thing about industrial designers and just the world we live in right now, you gotta be resilient and pivot, and you gotta adapt. With AI, with the economy or whatever, you just gotta roll with it, and not be.
Yeah, 100%. If you told me 10 years ago that I'd be in actual sales, like I work on named accounts right now, which is large scale automotive manufacturers who sign multi-million-dollar contracts for 3 years with us to use all of our software, not just one, right? They get everything. If you told me that's what I'd be doing, I'd be like, but again, super interesting, different, applying designer skill sets and mindset towards a different pathway.
100%.
And if I can take a second, when I was in college, that's one of the things Toby Thompson told us. In 1992, he's telling us as a group, half of you are not going to be designers. You're going to need to apply these skill sets to marketing, to business, to sales. And he didn't know it, but we would call that design thinking now, right? But he was telling us that's what you'll be doing, right? And here I am now on this side of the fence too, not even being a quote designer anymore.
That's all. You're saying that's exactly what Andres said. It's true. It's 100% true. You can't be in a vacuum. You can't be in a silo. You got to open your perspectives. I've learned that, just as an industrial designer, Brett, with my own business, there's so many things you just got to be open to. Like, I think I was going to have a podcast. No, you know what I mean? But there's some relevancy to it. I'm learning a lot. And I think you can never rest on your laurels. You got to always push forward and grow and adapt and stuff. So anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Jeff. I maybe get you on in the future. This is great.
Let me know.
We're going to be doing this podcast is not going to be just interviews. We're also going to be doing like work sessions, and we're going to be doing like a series of things where we, show the process of how to develop products, and getting into things like manufacturing, getting into things like additive and generative design, 3D printing, all that.
Sure.
I would love to, have you on again and talk more specifically about those type of things.
No problem. We can do that.
Awesome. Well, guys, everybody, thank you so much. And as always, get after it.